Okay, welcome back. Let's finish up our talk of chapter 46. We are going to pick up with our reproductive hormones. We're going to get a little bit technical for some of this, so pay attention. But thankfully in your textbook, this is only a few pages that we're covering, so it's not too much to read along with it. So, there are hormones that regulate reproduction, and interestingly enough, 3 of the main ones are similar between men and women. These are gonadotropin releasing hormone, which you will see as GN/RH, follicle stimulating hormone, which you will see as FSH, and luteinizing hormone, which you will see as LH. Those 3 abbreviations are going to show up a lot over the next 10 or so slides, so pay attention to those. Gonadotropin releasing hormone causes the release of FSH and LH. So it is a tropic hormone. A tropic hormone is a hormone that controls the release of other hormones. FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, will cause the production of gametes, and LH, or luteinizing hormone, causes the production of sex hormones. So in the male reproductive system, GnRH, which is released from the hypothalamus, is released to the anterior pituitary. Those are parts of your brain. We haven't studied that anatomy yet, so those are terms that you can be a little bit standoffish about right now. But GnRH, when it gets to the anterior pituitary, will cause a release of FSH and LH from the anterior pituitary. FSH is going to travel to the Sertoli cells, which are in the seminiferous tubules, and that will help nourish developing sperm and enhance spermatogenesis. LH will cause Leydig cells. These are in the connective tissues that are around the seminiferous tubules. It will cause Leydig cells to produce testosterone. Remember this last slide we said LH causes the production of sex hormones. One of those is testosterone. So it will cause the production of testosterone. It will also produce it'll lead to the production of other androgens, and that will lead to spermatogenesis. There is a negative feedback mechanism here to keep your androgen levels at a normal range. So Sertoli cells will also release inhibin, which will go back and inhibit the anterior pituitary. So if Sertoli cells are being overstimulated, that inhibin will stop the FSH from turning it on. Testosterone will regulate blood levels of GnRH, and it will also regulate FSH and LH, and it does that by inhibiting the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. Okay, in men, sperm can be continuously produced, so this doesn't happen on a cycle. This is just what can constantly be happening. In women, eggs are not continuously produced. We are going to talk about reproductive cycles that happen in women. And we're going to talk about 2 cycles, the ovarian cycle, which is what's going on in the ovary, and the uterine cycle, which is what's going on in the menstrual cycle. We're still going to be using these same 3 main hormones, GnRH, FSH, and LH, and that'll help control both the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle. Those need to be they need to be timed together so that release of the egg would be released into a uterus that was prepared to house it. Female cycles typically last around 28 days when we're talking about humans. A normal range, though, is 3 to 5 or 6 weeks. 20 to 40 days is kind of that normal range. Females typically start ovulating somewhere between 12 and 16 years old. So by your age, this is a normal thing for you to be going through. If you haven't been, if you haven't started going through your reproductive cycles yet, that might be something you should consider talking to a doctor about. Okay, so let's talk about the ovarian cycle first. The ovarian cycle goes in 3 different parts. Follicular phase is what is before ovulation. Then there's ovulation, and then there's a luteal phase. The follicular phase is sometimes called the pre-ovulatory phase. This because it is before ovulation. This is when the follicle that's going to be developed when the follicle develops before it's ovulated. Typically, there will be more than one follicle. There will be many follicles that are going to develop, And eventually, though, only one of those follicles will survive. The rest will be disintegrated. Then ovulation is when the mature secondary oocyte can be fertilized. So this growing follicle with the oocyte is going to eventually lead to ovulation when one mature secondary oocyte is released. And that secondary oocyte can be fertilized at that point. Then the post-ovulatory phase is the luteal phase. This is marked by the presence of the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum is a gland-like structure that will produce the hormone progesterone. Progesterone is a hormone that is needed to maintain pregnancy. The hypothalamus, which is part of your brain, plays a major role in the ovarian cycle. So the hypothalamus will release GnRH. GnRH will stimulate the anterior pituitary, and that will lead to the development or the release of FSH and LH. This is similar to what we just saw in a male cycle. FSH is called follicle stimulating hormone because it stimulates the follicle. So it is going to stimulate this follicle, the primary follicles, to start growing in the ovary. When the follicles start developing, the cells around them are going to start producing estradiol. Estradiol is one type of estrogen. And so estrogen levels start to increase. And here, this is actually showing the levels of LH in the gray, FSH in the yellow, and estradiol in purple. So you can see that estradiol is starting to increase during the follicular phase. Okay, we talked about several follicles can mature. Lower levels of estradiol here at the beginning of the follicular phase can actually inhibit the secretion of FSH and LH, whereas higher levels of estradiol can stimulate the hypothalamus and trigger higher levels of FSH and LH. So you actually see here as estradiol levels start to increase, that's when you also see higher levels of LH and FSH. So you have this dramatic increase in estradiol mid-cycle that dramatically increases the levels of LH and FSH. High levels of estrogen will cause a release of GnRH, and cells that are producing the LH will become sensitive to GnRH because of that increased estrogen levels. So you just have this positive feedback loop that is going to increase these hormones to stimulate conditions to allow pregnancy to occur. As the follicle is maturing, the cavity that surrounds that secondary follicle cycle, and that is the follicle that was produced at the end of the follicular phase. The follicular phase ends now as the secondary oocyte ruptures during ovulation. Then after ovulation is the luteal phase. All of these leftover cells from around the ovulated follicle will form an endocrine structure, and this is called the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum formation is stimulated by LH, and it will secrete two hormones, estradiol and progesterone. Now, where estradiol by itself would stimulate the hypothalamus, estradiol and progesterone together will inhibit the hypothalamus. So now you have the hypothalamus being inhibited. That negative feedback provides that GnRH, FSH, and LH levels stay low so that you don't start maturing another follicle. You don't want to start maturing an egg when a pregnancy could be about to occur. So all of this beginning part is going to be kept low while your body is waiting to see if it's about to be pregnant. If a pregnancy doesn't occur, the FSH and LH low levels will degenerate this corpus luteum. That'll decline the levels of estradiol and progesterone. So this negative feedback will go away, and you'll go back to your follicular phase. Okay, if a human female begins taking estradiol and progesterone immediately after the start of a new menstrual cycle, how will ovulation be affected? This is a very common combination of hormones that is commonly taken by a lot of people, including a lot of women your age. So how does that affect ovulation? Stop and think about it and explain it. This question did come from the textbook, so you can look it up in your textbook. Okay, next let's talk about the uterine cycle. During the uterine cycle, the endometrium, which is the lining of the uterine, will go through a process of shedding and thickening. There's 3 phases to this: menstruation, proliferation, and the secretory phase. This first phase here, menstruation, sometimes this is referred to as having a period. This is a cyclical shedding of the endometrium of the uterus if a pregnancy does not occur. So at the start of this cycle, you're not pregnant, so you're shedding that uterine layer. Excuse me. That allows, by the end of this cycle, the uterine lining, the endometrium, is at its thinnest stage through the cycle. Then proliferation occurs. This is the endometrium will start to get thicker in preparation for an egg to be implanted. And then the secretory phase will be the production and secretion of uterine glands. So before ovulation, when we are in the proliferative phase, the progesterone and estrogen from the ovarian cycle stimulate the uterus to start preparing for an embryo to be implanted. Estradiol, which is one of those estrogens, will be secreted by these growing follicles here in the ovary, and that's what signals for the endometrium to thicken. And this causes the follicular phase to coincide with the proliferative stage. After ovulation, estrogen and progesterone are being secreted by the corpus luteum, and that will stimulate the maintenance of this endometrium, and it even stimulates the enlargement and development of it. So you get more arteries coming in that will supply the endometrium and the endometrial glands with a greater blood flow. You'll have more nutrient-rich fluid, and that helps to sustain the life of the embryo even before it's implanted. Eventually, that embryo will implant and develop a placenta, but before that happens, it will be nourished by this endometrial lining. The luteal phase also is then going to be correlated with the secretory phase of the uterine cycle. If an embryo doesn't implant, the corpus luteum disintegrates, which leads to that decrease in estradiol and progesterone. That causes the arteries that are lining the uterus to constrict, so blood flow is deprived. So this endometrium, without that nourishment, will disintegrate. It'll release blood and endometrial tissue out of the birth canal, leading to the menstrual phase or menstruation that typically lasts 3 to 7 days. The new set of follicles begin to grow, and your body is ready to have another cycle to attempt to get pregnant again. Okay, FSH and LH get their names from events of the female reproductive cycle, but they also function in males. How are the functions in females and males similar? Here's that chart we're going over, talking about the events that happen in both the uterine cycle and the ovarian cycle. So those are things to be aware of: what hormones are happening, what is happening through the cycle, what are those phases, how do the phases in one cycle correlate with the phases in another cycle. Okay, peaks of LH and FSH production occur during which part? A, is that during the menstrual flow phase of the uterine cycle? B, the beginning of the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle? C, the period just before ovulation? D, the end of the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle? Or E, the secretory phase of the menstrual cycle? This question is in your PowerPoint. The answer is in the notes, so you can go back and look up if you answered it correctly or not. Okay, women tend to undergo menopause after about 500 cycles. Menopause is when ovulation and menstruation cease. Although this happens in women, it's unusual among most members of the animal kingdom. There's a lot of theories about how it could have evolved. We don't know exactly, but, evolutionarily, menopause may have evolved as an adaptation that let a mother provide better care for her children and for her grandchildren. Human beings as infants and children need a lot of care from their parents, so it doesn't make a lot of sense from an evolutionary perspective to have a woman possibly pregnant or giving birth at the end of her lifetime. So this allows the end of a woman's life to not be having babies, right? Menopause usually occurs somewhere around the age of 46 to 54. This is when ovaries lose their responsiveness to FSH and LH, and estrogen levels decline. Okay, something that's interesting to me is this concept of menstrual cycles and estrous cycles. So in all mammals, in all mammal females at least, the endometrium thickens before ovulation. We just saw that during humans, if ovulation is not followed by a pregnancy, that thickened endometrium will then be shed through a menstrual cycle. But there are other animals that go through an estrous cycle. And in these mammals, the uterus is not shed. The endometrial layer of the uterus is not shed. It is reabsorbed into the uterus when the animal doesn't get pregnant. So there's no excessive fluid flow. There's no menstrual cycle that occurs. Cyclical changes of the endometrium is part of the estrous cycle. And this also controls sexual receptivity. So often animals that go through an estrous cycle are only sexually receptive during certain periods of that cycle. Okay, which of the following is a true statement? A, all mammals have menstrual cycles. B, the endometrial lining is shed in menstrual cycles but reabsorbed in estrous cycles. C, the estrous cycles are more frequent than menstrual cycles. D, the estrous cycles are not controlled by hormones. Or E, ovulation occurs before the endometrium thickens in estrous cycles. In humans which go through a menstrual cycle, we're able to engage in sexual relationships during all phases of the uterine cycle. In animals with an estrous cycle, though, they're usually only sexually receptive during the period surrounding ovulation. They tend to enter what's called estrus or frenzy. Sometimes it's called being in heat. And that's when they're sexually receptive, and their body temperature often increases, which is why it's called heat. Okay, how does an estrous cycle differ from a menstrual cycle, and in what animals are the two types of cycles found? I didn't tell you what animals already. That's something you'll have to go back and look up. Okay, then let's start talking about what happens if the cycle doesn't end with menstruation. Instead, the cycle leads to pregnancy. So ovulation, here's some terms to be confident of. Ovulation is release of a secondary oocyte, and that secondary oocyte will enter the oviduct. Then fertilization or conception is sperm will enter the oviduct and can intercept an oocyte and fuse, and that fused oocyte, now it's a mature egg, and sperm will fuse and form a zygote. Then cleavage occurs. We discussed cleavage earlier this semester. This is cell division without cell growth. Cleavage will occur in the oviduct, and the embryo will be moving towards the uterus. Cleavage will be continuing by the time the embryo reaches the uterus. It'll be a ball of cells. So here at this stage. It'll float around in the uterus. It'll be nourished by endometrial secretions. Eventually, it'll become a blastocyst, which is a hollow ball of cells. As a blastocyst, then it'll go into implantation. It will need to implant into the endometrium in the uterus, and this usually happens about 7 days after conception. It needs to be in the uterus to be able to grow properly. If it were to grow outside of the uterus, it would not be able to, the pregnancy would not be viable, and it would in all likelihood be life-threatening to the mother as well. The baby around 2 to 4 weeks, for the first 2 to 4 weeks, will be nourished directly from the endometrium, but it will eventually start to develop a placenta. And it develops a placenta from the embryo's own cell layer. So the outer layer of the blastocyst will become the trophoblast. That will grow and meld with the endometrium, and that's what creates the placenta. And the placenta is where you can have diffusion between materials from the maternal blood supply and the fetal blood supply. So during pregnancy, the mother's and the fetus's blood supplies stay separate. They are not going to mix together. But the fetus is not able to breathe on its own. It's not able to eat on its own. It is dependent on all of that to come from the mother. So the maternal blood supply will come in. Here's the mother's arteries. It comes in, and it can kind of flow around this area here. And while it is flowing there, it can supply nutrients. So gases can diffuse, oxygen can diffuse into the the baby's blood supply. Gases can diffuse, like carbon dioxide, can diffuse out of the baby's blood supply towards the mother's. Nutrients, so sugars, essential fats, vitamins, immune protection, also all of this can happen. Meanwhile, the baby's blood is staying in the fetal capillaries. It's not going to leave and intermix. So while the two blood supplies are completely physically separate, those nutrients are able to diffuse in and out. Those antibodies, those gases are able to diffuse in and out. Blood will enter and leave the placenta through the umbilical cord. So here, this is a placenta, and it's actually, you can see it's rather large. I've always been surprised when my babies are born how huge their placenta is. And it flows through the umbilical cord, which is attached to what is now, what you have as a belly button is where your umbilical cord was attached to your placenta when you were a fetus. Pregnancy involves 3 trimesters, each roughly 3 months long. The first trimester is from 0 to 13 weeks. However, something that's interesting here is that pregnancy is measured starting not at the day of fertilization, but at the first day of the last period. So those first 2 weeks of the period were before fertilization even occurred. So going from first day of your last period, 13 weeks after that is your first trimester. Your second trimester is weeks 14 through 26, and your third trimester is weeks 27 to 40 weeks. So at 40 weeks is when a pregnancy is considered full term. That's when the baby should be ready to be born. Infants up to week 37 or later is still considered term, but babies that are born before week 37 are considered premature. Those last few weeks of pregnancy are especially important for development of their lungs and their ability to breathe. So premature infants often have to spend time in the NICU and the neonatal ICU to help develop them. They may have problems with growth, development, difficulties with breathing and digesting. So that time in the ICU helps them to develop their bodies and get to a point where they're safe, although there may be developmental problems that follow them throughout life. During the first trimester, the implanted embryo will secrete hormones, and those hormones help control the mother's reproductive system so that the uterus stays in a state that will supply safety for the baby. One of those hormones is HCG, or human chorionic gonadotropin, and HCG maintains secretion of progesterone and estrogen during early pregnancy. HCG is what pregnancy tests measure because of how well this hormone is released during pregnancy, but not during other times of life. Okay, so immediately that becomes your next question. Why does testing for HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, work as a pregnancy test early in pregnancy? What is the function of HCG in pregnancy? Okay, also during the first trimester, this is when the embryo forms. We'll talk about its stages of development in the next chapter, but it follows a pattern that's very similar to other vertebrate embryos. Extraembryonic membranes will form. All the major organ systems are established during the first trimester. So you can see the baby is developing, this is its heart, it's developing its circulatory system, it's developing its digestive system, it's developing bones. All of its major organ systems are beginning to be developed At 9 weeks of fertilization, the embryo is officially called a fetus. So at this stage, it is a fetus. It can move its arms and legs. It can start to look, it looks like a person, right? You can see here's a head. The hands don't show up too well. It's a hand. Here's feet. Here's its body. It has an eye. It has a nose. It has a little ear. It looks like a human. During the first trimester, this is when the mother is probably feeling horrible. She may have morning sickness, which is a misnomer. It is nausea that can last all day long. She may be tired. She may have sleep disturbances. Her breast tissue may be painful or tender. She may have a lot of physical feelings of pregnancy before she's even able to have a positive pregnancy test. Here's an ultrasound of the fetus. So this is the head. This is the spine right there. A shoulder. You can see the ribs. Oh, here's its mouth, its nose, its eye. Hand moving here. Maybe that's a foot. It's sucking its thumb. Its belly. In the second trimester, the fetus increases in size. Its human features are refined. Here is a baby or a fetus at 14 weeks. Here's a fetus at 20 weeks, very definitely a little girl. At 20 weeks, the fetus is about 19 centimeters. That's about 7.5 inches long. It weighs now about 1 pound. And this is typically the golden period of pregnancy. Morning sickness disappears. Sleep becomes more normal. Energy levels increase. The mother isn't yet feeling as big as she'll be during the third trimester. She may just be beginning to show. She may just be beginning to feel the infant kicking or feel the fetus kicking. In the third trimester, circulatory and respiratory systems mature. Those are the last systems to really fully mature. Muscles thicken, skeleton hardens. The third trimester ends when the baby is born. Baby should be born as close to 40 weeks as possible. Babies that are born before 24 weeks have difficulties with survival. They'll need extensive medical care at that point. Okay, during human gestation, rudiments of all organs develop A, in the first trimester, B, second trimester, C, third trimester, D, while the embryo is in the oviduct, or E, during the blastocyst stage. Okay, so the third trimester ends with childbirth, which is sometimes called labor. We don't really know all the details about how labor exactly starts, but is definitely controlled by hormonal changes. Hormonal changes can induce birth. So estrogen will make the uterus more sensitive to oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone that will help labor to occur. Oxytocin also will help the mother have feelings of love and bonding to her infant, and it also has positive, makes just the mother feel good, kind of protects her physically from, so she feels better. She may even enjoy giving birth. Sometimes Pitocin is used, and Pitocin will have these same abilities to stimulate birth, but Pitocin does not come with those same happy feelings that are associated with oxytocin, though. Okay, so oxytocin will stimulate the uterus to contract. It will stimulate the placenta to start making prostaglandins. Prostaglandins stimulate more contractions of the uterus, which will form this positive feedback to increase the levels of prostaglandin. And those contractions also stimulate positive feedback of oxytocin. So we have a strong positive feedback so that you have strong uterine contractions until the baby is born. After the baby is born, the placenta will also dislodge and be expelled after the baby. So the 3 stages of labor are first, the thinning and opening of the cervix or dilation. So you may have heard on TV or something, maybe you've actually been involved in a real birth. The doctor will, or the midwife or whoever will measure the progress of labor by saying how dilated the mother is. So she's 4 centimeters dilated or she's 8 centimeters dilated. So that's as the cervix is opening so that it can open enough for the baby's head to come through. The second phase is expulsion. This is when the baby is expelled or sent out from the birth canal. And the third is delivery of the placenta. So each baby will, or each fetus, zygote, will stimulate the production of their own placenta, which is expelled following the birth of that baby. Following this, you now have a baby, so you have to start taking care of a baby. In mammals, this includes lactation, which is the production of mother's milk. Lactation produces first, like perfect foods. I don't want to say perfect foods if someone can't breastfeed, but it is a complete nourishment for your baby. It also stimulates uterine contraction so that the uterus will go back down in stage to a pre-pregnancy size. Okay, one thing that's still being studied a lot is why doesn't the mother's immune system destroy a developing embryo or fetus? The embryo, the fetus, is a foreign object in the mother's body. It's not, it doesn't have the same genetics, the same cell markers exactly like the mother has. It's genetically unique. So the body should recognize it as foreign. It does look like mother's immune systems is suppressed during pregnancy. And if you even look at women who have rheumatoid arthritis, this is one type of autoimmune disease, their symptoms of this autoimmune disorder become less severe during pregnancy. So that suggests that the immune system is suppressed during pregnancy, and that may be why the immune system doesn't attack the developing baby. Okay, some people, very much want to get pregnant. Some people very much do not want to get pregnant. So we're just going to go through these topics a little bit. Contraception is deliberately preventing pregnancy. And there are three main categories that this falls into: preventing release of eggs and sperm, keeping sperm and eggs apart, and preventing implantation of an embryo. So some different ways to do that. A male can go through a vasectomy. A vasectomy will prevent sperm from transporting down the male duct system. Female combination birth control pills. This could be an injection, a patch, or a vaginal ring, besides just a pill, will prevent primary oocytes from developing and ovulating. Abstinence, both, I guess, male and female, prevents sperm from being deposited into the vagina. A condom will also prevent sperm from being deposited into the vagina, and so will the female condom. Coitus interruptus, which is when someone is trying to just pull out before ejaculation happens. This is a very dangerous choice as far as birth control. It has a very high failure rate, but ideally that would prevent sperm from being deposited in the vagina. A female tubal ligation will prevent an oocyte from being transported in the oviduct. Spermicides, this would include diaphragms or progestin-only mini pills or injections, prevent sperm from moving through the female reproductive tract. So even if they make it to the vagina, they don't make it past there. And then morning after pills and IUDs will prevent sperm and egg from joining. And if they are taken immediately after sperm and egg of joining, they can prevent implantation of the blastocyst. However, none of these will work other places. So if you were to take the morning after pill a week later, after the blastocyst is implanted, it's not going to do anything. If you were to put a condom on after the sperm is in the vagina, it's not going to do anything. So they have to be taken at the right stage, and they will be able to affect your likelihood of getting pregnant, depending on how well it's used, and they each have their own variable rates of success. Okay, in what ways are a tubal ligation and a vasectomy similar? Tubal ligation being what a woman would do, and a vasectomy what a man would do. Okay, there's also modern reproductive technologies when it is more difficult to get pregnant. So science is a wonderful thing. Not only is it fun to sit here in class and learn this, but it also, understanding this, can help it be possible to create reproductive therapies. So a lot of reproductive problems, including genetic diseases and infertility, can be addressed. There's a lot of possible causes of infertility, and they vary a lot. both men and women can contribute to infertility. So just because a couple is not able to conceive after a while doesn't mean that it's a woman's fault or the man's fault. It could be either one or both. Among the most preventable causes of infertility, STDs are the most significant. I cannot stress enough how important it is for you to do whatever you can to avoid STDs, and if you get an STD, to treat it immediately. I am certainly not going to try to be the morality police and say that you should be abstinent, although I think that is certainly a fabulous decision for you to make at your age if you choose that. But if you are going to be sexually active, please make sure that you are always using protection. Please make sure that you are getting yourself tested and your partner tested so that you can deal with that and not just be left infertile for the rest of your life. In vitro fertilization, or IVF, it will mix eggs and sperm in a culture dish, and so you end up with a fertilized egg, and it can actually even develop to the embryo stage and then be implanted in a uterus. And sperm or sperm nuclei can be injected directly into an oocyte. That is what this picture is going on here. This is holding this egg in place, and this is about to inject that nuclei into the oocyte. There's also disorders that can be detected during pregnancy. One of those tests is an ultrasound. So ultrasound imaging can detect the fetal size. So every time I've been pregnant, around like 17 to 20 weeks of pregnancy, I'll have an ultrasound, and it'll measure the size of the brain, the size of the kidneys, the size of, the femur, different parts of the body to make sure everything is developing appropriately. You can also see, this is a boy or a girl, or see, what you can see that you just saw an ultrasound, you know what you can see. Okay. Amniocentesis and chorionic villus sampling. These are a little bit more invasive. And if someone is at risk, these may be a viable option of something to test for. They use a needle to obtain fetal cells, whether it takes it from the fluid or from a sampling of actual tissue. And the mother's blood typically contains DNA from the embryo, so a sample of maternal blood can often be used to analyze the genome of a fetus. All of these tests, amniocentesis, CVS, and sampling the maternal blood, you can end up with an actual genetic analysis. So this baby has a gene for this. You also know this baby is a boy or a girl. And they happen at different points in pregnancy, so you don't even have to wait until you're 20 weeks pregnant for an ultrasound. These can happen much earlier. However, a lot of disorders even most disorders, almost all, are not going to be treatable in the uterus, and many cannot be corrected after birth. So in a lot of cases, you are either going to get the results, and then you're left with the options of this is a pregnancy that needs to be terminated, that you can't handle it, or you can't terminate the pregnancy for, personal beliefs. So you are just going to have a child with you'll just know they have these defects. So genetic testing of fetuses have a lot of ethical questions and a lot of difficult decisions for the parents to have to consider. Okay, a final question here. Which statement about human reproduction is false? A, fertilization occurs in oviducts. B, effective hormonal contraceptives are currently available only for females. C, an oocyte completes meiosis after a sperm penetrates it. D, the earliest stages of spermatogenesis occur closest to the lumen of the seminiferous tubules. Or E, spermatogenesis and oogenesis require different temperatures. Okay, that's finally the end of this lecture video. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to talk to you anytime, email, office hours, whatever you need. A lot of this chapter may also, sometimes it can bring up trauma from your past, dealing with these issues or fears of the future. So if you're dealing with any of that, I'm a safe place. You can come talk to me at any point. I will do what I can to help you. Okay, talk to you later. Bye.